The wind was sharp that morning, colder than it had any right to be in late autumn. I stood at the edge of the grave while my son's casket sank into the ground, the ropes creaking with every inch. People whispered prayers, their words thin as smoke in the air. Some clutched tissues, others bowed their heads, but I only kept my hand on the casket until it slipped from my reach. Letting go felt nothing like acceptance. It felt like betrayal. Before we continue, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the bell icon so you never miss powerful stories like this one. The pastor spoke about mercy and mysteries. Men from town shifted on their feet, heavy in black suits they rarely wore. My neighbors pressed my shoulder and muttered, "I'm sorry, Eldon, anything you need." All of it blurred together. The only thing I noticed with clarity was who wasn't there. Mara, my daughter-in-law, my son Silas's wife, the woman who should have been standing beside me when we put him in the ground. Her absence was louder than the pastor's sermon, louder than the shovels striking earth. Some whispered that maybe she was too grief-stricken to attend. Others said she was sick. I kept my silence. Grief has a way of lending excuses to the undeserving, but I wasn't ready to offer her any. By the time we returned to the house, the rooms were crowded with people carrying trays of food and voices full of pity. I accepted their condolences, nodded at their kindness, and waited for the house to empty. Mara sent a text. With my sister. Couldn't stop crying. Please handle everything. No warmth, no presence. Just words that could have been copied from anyone's phone. I set the phone down, tried to focus on the flowers, the notes, the soft murmur of people who didn't know what else to say. But when the house finally thinned, and I sat alone at the kitchen table, a new message lit my screen. A notification. A photo. It was Mara. She was smiling under neon lights, a cocktail glass raised toward the camera. Someone else's hand clinked against hers at the edge of the frame. The caption read, "Finally breathing." The timestamp, 1:13 p.m. At 1:13 p.m., the pastor had been lowering his voice to pray over Silas's grave. At 1:13 p.m., dirt had been striking the lid of my son's coffin, and at 1:13 p.m., Mara had been raising a glass to life. Something inside me went quiet, colder than the November air. I turned off the phone and tried to steady myself with tasks that didn't matter. Washing already clean dishes, folding an empty dish towel. That's when I noticed a slip of paper tucked behind a photograph in Silas's room. It wasn't from the hospital that had called me with the news. It was from North Cross Clinic, 2 days before Silas's supposed death. Intake form. Signature required. The dates didn't line up. Nothing lined up. Later that evening, a knock came at the door. Martin Keene, my lawyer. An old friend stepped inside. His face was grave, his coat still damp from the cold. "I won't stay long," he said gently, "but I need you to know. Mara contacted the insurance office yesterday. She was eager to start the Silas's claim." Yesterday? My voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. "Before the funeral," Martin confirmed. He noticed the paper in my hand. "What's that?" "A receipt from a clinic, 2 days before." He exhaled slowly, already measuring the road between suspicion and proof. "Don't open anything from the insurance company without me. Let me make some calls." When he left, the house fell silent again. I sat at the table with the receipt on one side and Mara's photograph glowing on the other. My son was gone, but the math didn't add up. And when grief and arithmetic collide, the truth is never far behind. I whispered into the stillness of Silas's room before turning out the light. "If you're gone, I'll carry you. If you're not, I'll find you." It wasn't anger. It wasn't even hope. It was a promise. The house had always been too big after Margaret passed. Now, with Silas gone, it was cavernous. Walls that carried no echo, only the sound of a furnace straining against the cold. The night after the funeral, I walked through each room like a stranger. Chairs lined up, coats still on hooks, photographs in their places, everything where it should be, except the people. I sat at the kitchen table with the envelope from Prairie Mutual unopened in front of me. Mara's message still burned in my phone. With my sister, couldn't stop crying. But the truth was that at 1:13 p.m., she had been raising the glass, not bowing her head. My grief was no longer pure. It had been mixed with suspicion, and suspicion has a way of keeping you awake. The next morning, the house told me more stories than the people at the funeral had. Mara arrived, not with swollen eyes or flowers, but with a clipped tone and a list of things she needed. "We'll have to get the paperwork moving," she said briskly, standing by the counter as though she were late for a meeting. The insurance, the estate. Silas would have wanted efficiency. Her eyes didn't linger on the photo of my boy by the mantel, the one in his Little League uniform, glove too big for his hand. She didn't pause at the folded flag that rested in the hall, sent by his regiment when he finished service years earlier. She looked past all of it, toward what could be signed and cashed. I asked if she had slept. She shrugged. "Barely. Too much on my mind." She slid a document across the counter without asking me to sit. Her nails tapped the corner. "You'll need to sign here eventually. It speeds things up if you're not difficult." Not difficult. My son was buried less than 24 hours earlier, and the woman who wore his name asked me to be cooperative, for her convenience. I didn't sign. I folded the paper and set it beside the envelope from Prairie Mutual. "We'll review it with Martin," I said, my voice steady. Her eyes narrowed just slightly. "You don't trust me?" "I trust what's true," I answered. She smiled, thin as a blade. "Truth can be messy, Eldon. It's better when it's simplified." That afternoon, I wandered through Silas's room again. The jacket still hung by the door, his boots neatly lined at the foot of the bed. Mara had not stepped inside, not once. It was as though she wanted to erase him faster than the grave could. The receipt from North Cross Clinic lay folded in my pocket. I studied it under the lamp. Intake date, 2 days before. Doctor's initials, VH. Not the hospital where they said he died, but a small clinic on the edge of town. The numbers didn't make sense. The signature didn't look right. I began a small notebook. On the first page I wrote, "Mara absent at funeral photo, at bar, timestamp 1:13 p.m. Insurance contacted before burial North Cross Clinic receipt. 2 days prior, I underlined the doctor's initials twice. VH. That evening, Mara left abruptly, claiming she had errands. I watched her car from the window, taillights shrinking into the dark. The house fell still again, the kind of stillness that makes you notice the hum of a refrigerator, the tick of a clock, the faint settling of old wood. I sat in my chair, the notebook open on my lap, and whispered to the empty air, "Silas, if this is grief playing tricks, I'll forgive myself. But if it isn't, I'll find what they've done." And the cold house gave no answer. Only the sound of winter pressing against the glass. The next day began gray, the kind of sky that presses low enough to make your shoulders hunch without knowing why. I tried to busy myself with the ordinary rituals, coffee on the stove, the morning paper folded by the door, but grief changes the way even simple things taste. The coffee was bitterer, the headlines blurred, and still Mara's absence from the funeral clung to me like smoke in the walls. When Martin arrived mid-morning, his expression told me he hadn't come with comfort. He placed a small stack of papers on the kitchen table, his hands careful as though the wood beneath them might splinter. "I made a few calls," he said quietly. "The clinic you mentioned, North Cross. It's not tied to the hospital that handled the death certificate. That alone isn't proof of anything. But the doctor's name, Vernon Hale, has surfaced before. He's known for special consultations. Cash preferred. No proper record trails?" I looked at the receipt again, at the uneven handwriting, the rushed scrawl that didn't resemble any official signature I'd ever seen. My gut tightened. Mara entered through the side door not long after. She carried shopping bags, bright ones with brand logos. She set them down on the counter without a word, as though she had returned from nothing more than an ordinary errand. "You're here early," she said flatly to Martin. "Just helping Eldon keep things in order," he replied, his voice steady, professional. Her eyes flicked to the papers on the table. "Insurance forms?" "No," I answered, slipping the clinic receipt back under my palm. "Something else." She narrowed her gaze, but only for a moment. Then she smiled, thin and practiced, and reached for the coffee pot. That night, after she had left again, claiming she was staying with her sister, I searched Silas's desk. Drawers that should have been empty held scraps that mattered, an appointment reminder card stamped with North Cross, a payment slip folded once and hidden beneath old tax records. It was as if the clinic was stitched into the days before his supposed death, and yet no one had mentioned it. I sat back in the chair, the notebook open again. I wrote, "Multiple receipts from North Cross Clinic. Dr. Vernon Hale's signature irregular Mara, showing no grief, only urgency for insurance." I underlined the last note 3 times. The red flags weren't faint anymore. They were bright enough to burn. The first snow of the season dusted the yard that morning, a thin veil across the dead grass and the stone path leading toward the tool shed. I stood at the kitchen window, coffee cooling in my hand, watching as Rafael Cortez, the gardener, bent to clear fallen branches. He had worked for us on and off for years. Quiet man, always polite, always kept to himself. But lately I'd begun to notice things I couldn't ignore. His truck sat in the drive longer than usual. His tools, once neatly packed, now lingered outside the shed until dusk. And when Mara spoke to him, she dropped her voice low, the kind of tone that belonged in shadows, rather than sunlight. That afternoon, while stacking firewood, I heard their voices carrying from behind the garage. Not loud, but urgent. Mara's laugh, sharp, brittle, cut through the cold. Raphael's reply was muffled, but his hand brushed hers as they walked back toward the house. I froze, hidden by the corner of the wall, my heart hammering against ribs that felt older than my years. Later, Mara entered the kitchen carrying a paper bag. "Groceries," she said quickly, setting it down, though she hadn't been gone long enough to make it to town. When she left again, I found inside not milk or bread, but an empty envelope torn at the corner. Cash had been inside once. Its absence spoke louder than words. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by Silas's desk, the lamp throwing a small circle of light, and opened my notebook. Raphael's scene with Mara, hand on hers. Cash envelope disguised as groceries. Conversations hidden from me. The pieces were shifting into place. Raphael wasn't just a gardener anymore. He was entwined in something darker, something that explained Mara's absence, her ease, her shopping bags, her coldness. The next day, when Mara left early claiming she was going to visit her sister again, I decided not to stay behind. I drove slowly, far enough not to be noticed, close enough to follow her taillights through the town's narrow streets. She'd parked outside a small diner at the edge of the industrial district. Through the frosted glass, I saw her slide into a booth. A moment later, Raphael joined her, their heads bent close, his hand covering hers across the table. When the waitress arrived, they pulled apart like children caught misbehaving. But when she left, they leaned in again. Voices low, Mara nodding as if sealing a pact. I left before they could see me. Some truths don't need witnesses. They burn bright enough just from being glimpsed. Back home, the house felt colder than it had before. Betrayal chills more deeply than winter. The next morning, I woke before dawn. Sleep had become a luxury, something grief no longer allowed. Instead, I found myself pacing through the kitchen, the lamp over the sink throwing long shadows. On the table sat the receipt from North Cross Clinic, its edges already worn from how many times I had handled it. Martin arrived just after sunrise. He placed his briefcase on the table, his expression grim. "I called a friend in the state registry office," he said. "Your hunch was right. Dr. Vernon Hale has a history. He's been cited more than once for irregular paperwork, mostly tied to death certificates and sudden medical discharges. Nothing that sticks. He's careful. But his name shows up where it shouldn't. I nodded, feeling the chill seep into my chest. And Silas's record? Filed under Hale's name, Martin confirmed. But the signatures don't match the hospital's. It looks forged. The weight of those words sank deep. If the certificate wasn't real, what had I buried? That afternoon I drove out to North Cross myself. The clinic stood on the edge of town, a squat building with peeling paint and blinds pulled half closed. Inside, the waiting room was empty. A nurse at the counter looked up, her eyes wary when I mentioned Hale's name. "He's not in today," she said too quickly. "Does he ever see patients here?" I pressed. Her lips tightened. "Depends on the patient." I left, but not before I noticed a stack of forms by the counter. Hale's initials, VH, scrawled on several. Always rushed, always the same hurried curve. The same signature I had seen on Silas's receipt. Driving back, my thoughts tangled with memories. Silas laughing in the yard. Silas standing straight in his uniform. Silas telling me once, not long ago, "Dad, sometimes I feel like someone's watching me." I'd brushed it off as paranoia. Now it returned to me with the weight of prophecy. That night, the house felt colder than ever. Mara hadn't returned. Her car was gone, no note left behind. I sat with Martin, who had stayed late, papers spread across the table. "This isn't just negligence," he said. "Hale takes cash. That means someone paid him. And if Mara was in such a rush to contact the insurance company, I'd bet she knows exactly what she bought." "Bought?" I repeated. "A death certificate," Martin said flatly. The words sat between us like a stone. I stared at the closed door, imagining Mara slipping in with her careless smile, Raphael waiting in the wings, Hale signing papers for money. I opened my notebook and wrote in heavy ink, "Dr. Vernon Hale, fraudulent certificates, cash deals. Silas's record, forged. Mara must have arranged payment." For the first time, suspicion hardened into something sharper. It wasn't just doubt anymore. It was evidence. Mara returned 2 days later, her heels clicking across the porch like she owned the place. She carried shopping bags again, this time full of clothes, with price tags still dangling. No sign of grief, no trace of exhaustion. Just a woman draped in indulgence. "You've barely eaten," she said, glancing at my untouched plate. Her tone was flat, almost rehearsed, as though she'd read somewhere that widows and fathers needed reminders about meals. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't ask about Silas. Instead, she poured herself a glass of wine and sat at the kitchen table, where Martin and I had laid out files the night before. She ran a finger across the envelope from Prairie Mutual. "You haven't opened it yet?" "Not without my lawyer," I replied. Her eyes flicked to me, sharp. "Eldon, dragging your feet won't change what's owed. Silas made provisions. That money should be working for us, not sitting in some office." "Us?" I asked quietly. She blinked but didn't flinch. "For me? For the life Silas wanted us to have." The room went cold around her words. I studied her face, the carefully drawn lines of makeup, the smile that looked more like a mask. And for the first time, I saw it crack. Her voice sharpened. "You're making this harder than it needs to be. I've got plans. Raphael's going to help with the property, renovations. We'll make this place worth something. But I can't move forward if you insist on dragging the past behind you." It was the first time she'd said Raphael's name so freely, without disguise. She must have realized it the moment it left her lips, because she quickly added, "He's just helping with labor, nothing more?" I didn't reply. Instead, I reached into the drawer and slid out the clinic receipt, laying it flat between us. Her eyes froze on the paper. For one heartbeat, her mask slipped completely, the kind of startled flinch you can't fake. Then just as quickly, she composed herself, her smile tight. "Old paperwork," she said dismissively. "You shouldn't be digging through things you don't understand." But her hand trembled as she lifted the wine glass. Later, after she stormed off to her room, I wrote in my notebook, "Mara mentioned Raphael openly. Confronted with clinic receipt, visible panic, mask slipping, I underlined the last note until the paper nearly tore. The storm that night rattled the windows until dawn. I hadn't slept. Too much of Mara's false smile lingered in my mind, too much of Raphael's name echoing in her careless slip. By morning, I resolved that if the truth was hiding inside this house, I would drag it into the light. I started in Silas's study. The desk drawers had already given me the clinic receipt, but I hadn't searched deeper. I removed each drawer, set them on the rug, and ran my hands along the wood. That's when I felt it, a slight give beneath the bottom panel, a hidden compartment. Inside was a slim ledger, bound in cracked leather. My son's handwriting filled the first pages, notes about bills, savings, reminders for work. But then the script changed. The ink was heavier, the lines shorter. These weren't Silas's words. They were Mara's. Entries tracked money withdrawn in cash, large amounts, always followed by initials. VH. And on more than one line, another set of initials appeared. RC. Rafael Cortez. One entry in particular stopped my breath. Advance to VH. Final arrangements completed. RC delivered payment. The date matched 2 days before Silas's supposed death. I sat back, the ledger trembling in my hands. This wasn't suspicion anymore. This was conspiracy, written in ink. That evening I confronted Mara. She was sitting in the living room, flipping through a glossy magazine. Legs crossed like nothing in the world weighed on her. I placed the ledger on the table. Her eyes landed on it, and for the second time in as many days, her mask slipped. "Where did you find that?" she demanded, her voice sharper than glass. "In Silas's study," I said. "Hidden. He didn't write these pages. You did." Her lips tightened. "You're prying into things that don't concern you. Anything tied to my son concerns me." She stood, her hands clenching at her sides. "You don't understand. There are things bigger than you, bigger than this family." I leaned forward, my voice steady. "Then explain them. Because all I see is cash moving to a corrupt doctor and a gardener who doesn't belong in this house." She glared at me, but no words came. Instead, she stormed down the hall, her footsteps heavy on the stairs. When the silence returned, I opened my notebook and wrote, "Ledger found, Mara's handwriting, payments to VH and RC. Entry confirming Raphael delivered cash. Final arrangements completed. Silas's death stage." I underlined the last phrase so hard the pen nearly tore the page. The following afternoon, the phone rang while Mara was out. The voice on the other end was hesitant, almost trembling. "Mr. Graves?" she asked. "Yes," I answered. "This is Ivy Lane, Mara's younger sister." Her name struck me like a small crack of thunder. I had only met her twice, both times at family gatherings where she kept mostly to herself. Eyes lowered, words scarce. Now her voice carried urgency. "I shouldn't be calling," she whispered. "If she finds out—" "Take your time," I said, steadying my tone. "What's on your mind?" There was a pause, and then, "I know about the clinic. I know about Raphael. Mara, she thinks she's in control, but it's unraveling. She's using people, and she's dangerous when cornered." I felt my grip tighten on the receiver. "What exactly do you know, Ivy?" "She didn't want Silas anymore," Ivy said bluntly. Her words cracked, as if spoken through shame. "She told me months ago that she was tired of him, that Raphael made her feel alive. When Silas found out, he threatened to expose her. That's when she started talking about arrangements." "Arrangements," I repeated, the word heavy as stone. "She paid Hale to make it official," Ivy continued. "I didn't understand at first, but then the money started disappearing, and Raphael was always around. When I saw her ledger, I knew. She's planning to take everything, your house, the insurance, all of it, and she won't stop." The silence that followed was thick, the kind that bends the air around it. "Why tell me this now?" I asked. "Because she's slipping," Ivy said. "She's careless. And when she falls, she'll try to take me down with her. I need you to know where to look before she burns it all." "Where?" Her voice dropped to a whisper. There's a lockbox in her closet. Documents, receipts. Things she never meant for anyone to see. But be careful. If she catches you, she'll find a way to make you disappear, the way she made Silas disappear. The line went dead. I stood there, the phone heavy in my hand, the words echoing through the empty house. My notebook waited on the table. I opened it and wrote, Ivy Lane confirms Mara's affair, plus payments. Mara planned arrangements after Silas threatened her. Lockbox in Mara's closet. Potential evidence. The walls of the house felt closer, tighter. Mara's secrets weren't shadows anymore. They were flesh and blood, walking my hallways, waiting for me to pry them open, and I knew I would. Ivy's words haunted me all night. The sound of her whisper carried more weight than all of Mara's sharp remarks and false smiles combined. A lockbox, a hidden core of truth, waiting in the very walls of my own house. At dawn, I walked the hall toward Mara's room. The door was closed but not locked. Inside, the air smelled faintly of perfume and wine. Her closet stretched along one wall, dresses and coats hanging in perfect order, as though she staged the room for visitors who would never come. I pushed aside a row of coats until my hand brushed against something cold. Metal. I pulled free a small gray box, heavier than it looked. The key was not in sight, but Mara had underestimated my patience. Back in Silas's study, I pried the lock open with an old screwdriver. The lid popped, and the truth spilled out. Inside were receipts, stacks of them bound with rubber bands, clinic payments signed by Hale, hotel bills under false names, cash withdrawals that matched dates in Mara's ledger, and one envelope that made my throat tighten. It was addressed to Rafael Cortez. Inside, I found a letter in Mara's own handwriting. When this is done, the money will be ours. Eldon is old, easily managed. Martin can be pushed out. We'll start fresh, far away. No one will question us. Destroy this after reading. But Raphael hadn't destroyed it. He had kept it, tucked among Mara's secrets. The worst was still at the bottom. A photocopy of Silas's medical report, altered. The original date had been crossed out, rewritten in Hale's scrawl. My son's life reduced to lines of ink purchased with cash. I sat there, the box open before me, my hands shaking. The proof was undeniable now. Mara hadn't just failed to grieve, she had orchestrated everything. That evening Mara returned. I had already hidden the box beneath floorboards in my study. She entered the kitchen smiling, her hair perfect, her eyes quick. You look pale, she said lightly. Are you eating? I didn't answer. Not yet. I watched her pour herself a drink, watched the way her hands trembled slightly before she steadied them on the glass. She was unraveling, and I was ready. In my notebook, I wrote, lockbox found, receipts, altered reports, Mara's letter to Raphael, proof of fraud, affair, conspiracy, Mara slipping, timing close. The house no longer felt like a prison. It felt like a battlefield. I spent that night planning, not sleeping, not grieving, planning. The lockbox now hid beneath the study floorboards, every receipt and letter preserved, each one a nail in Mara's coffin of lies. My son's face stared back at me from the photo on the mantel, and I whispered to him, the time is close. At dawn, I drove to Martin's office. His eyes sharpened as I laid out the documents one by one, the forged reports, the cash receipts, Mara's letter to Raphael. He read in silence, the only sound the slow tick of the clock behind his desk. When he finally looked up, his jaw was set like stone. This is enough, he said. We can take this straight to the authorities. Hale, Mara, Raphael, they'll have no defense against paper this solid. But I shook my head. If we move too soon, she'll twist it. She'll say I'm confused, grieving. She'll paint herself as the widow overwhelmed by an old man's suspicion. We need to let her show her hand. Martin leaned back, thoughtful. So what are you suggesting? A confrontation, I said. Public. Somewhere she can't control the story. with witnesses who'll remember every word. He nodded slowly. The reading of the will. It's in 2 weeks. Everyone will be there. The lawyer, the family, even Raphael if she drags him along. If she tries to claim the estate and insurance, we'll be ready. We'll open this box in front of all of them. The plan took root in that office, steady and cold. When I returned home, Mara was waiting in the kitchen. She was dressed too finely for an ordinary day, her lips painted dark, her perfume heavy enough to choke the air. "You were gone early," she remarked, sipping from her coffee. "Business?" I met her eyes. "Just making sure everything's in order." Her smile flickered, but she masked it quickly. "Good, because soon we'll be able to move forward. You'll see, it's better this way." She didn't notice the dirt beneath my fingernails from prying up the floorboards. She didn't know the walls of her scheme were already closing in. That night, I sat with my notebook and wrote, Plan. Confrontation at will, reading. Martin prepared. Evidence secured. Mara still confident. I underlined the last line twice. Her confidence was her greatest weakness, and soon it would undo her. The day of the will reading arrived with skies the color of steel. I dressed carefully, the way my father taught me long ago. Neat coat, polished shoes, no frayed edges. Dignity was a weapon as sharp as any truth, and I would need both before the day was through. The lawyer's office smelled faintly of varnish and old paper. Chairs lined the walls, polished wood table gleaming under the soft light. Martin was already there, his briefcase resting on the floor at his feet. He gave me the smallest nod, steady, reassuring. Mara swept in not long after, wrapped in a black coat too fine for the occasion, Raphael trailing behind her like a shadow that thought itself indispensable. She kissed the air beside Martin's cheek, feigned courtesy, and sat with her legs crossed, hands folded delicately on her lap. But her eyes, sharp, restless, betrayed her nerves. The reading began simply enough. Formal words, dates, legal clauses that passed like a slow tide. Silas's provisions were straightforward. A portion to me, some to charity, the remainder to his wife, Mara. Her lips curled into a smile as the lawyer read her name aloud. She leaned back as though she had already won. That was when Martin cleared his throat. "Before we finalize distributions," he said evenly, "Mr. Graves has information relevant to the validity of these claims." Mara stiffened. "What kind of information?" I reached beneath the table and placed the lockbox on the polished wood. Its dull thud silenced the room. I lifted the lid slowly, letting the contents speak louder than any accusation. Receipts slid free, payments to Hale, cash withdrawals signed in Mara's hand, the altered medical report with its forged dates, and finally, the letter she had written to Raphael, promising a future built on my son's erasure. The color drained from her face. This is fabricated," she stammered, reaching for the papers. Martin's hand stopped hers. "These documents have been authenticated," he said firmly. "Handwriting matches. Dates align with bank records. The doctor involved, Vernon Hale, is already under investigation." Raphael shifted in his seat, his bravado faltering. "Mara," he whispered, but she silenced him with a glare. I leaned forward, my voice calm but cutting. "While Silas was being lowered into the ground, you were raising a glass. While I was burying my son, you were planning a future with him." I nodded toward Raphael, "and paying a doctor to make it possible." Her composure shattered. "You don't understand. Silas was going to ruin everything. He was going to expose me. I had no choice." The room froze. Her words, her confession hung heavy in the air. Martin turned to the lawyer. "You heard that?" The lawyer nodded gravely, already closing the will. "Given this revelation, Mara Hayes, your claim is void. This matter will be forwarded to the authorities immediately." Mara's face twisted, rage battling fear. Raphael rose, but the strength in his posture was gone. I sat back, my notebook closed in my pocket. For months I had written notes in silence. Now the truth had spoken for itself. The sheriff's car idled outside the lawyer's office, its lights flashing muted red and blue across the frosted windows. Mara sat rigid in her chair, her hands clamped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had turned white. Raphael stood near the door, pacing, mumbling excuses that no one believed. When the deputies entered, silence fell. Martin handed over the folder of evidence. The lockbox was carried out under official seal, every page now a weapon in the hands of justice. "Mara Hayes," the sheriff said firmly, "you're under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, and attempted insurance theft. You have the right to remain silent." "Ivy lied," Mara shrieked, her voice cracking. "She turned him against me. Silas was weak. He didn't deserve." Her words dissolved as the deputies pulled her to her feet. The look in her eyes was wild, desperate, like a cornered animal that finally realized the walls were closing in. Raphael tried to slip out behind her, but the sheriff blocked his way. "Mr. Cortez, you'll need to come with us too. You've got plenty to answer for." For the first time, his bravado vanished entirely. Shoulders slumped, he followed Mara out, the weight of their schemes dragging them down heavier than any chain. When the door shut behind them, the room seemed to exhale. Martin placed a steady hand on my shoulder. "It's done," he said softly. "They won't touch another dime, not from Silas's name, not from yours." I nodded, but my throat was thick. "It won't bring him back." "No," Martin agreed, "but it gives him peace. And it gives you the truth." Weeks passed. Winter deepened, covering the town in white silence. I returned to the rhythms of the house, the creak of the floorboards, the hiss of the furnace, the quiet stillness that grief always leaves behind. But something had changed. The house no longer felt like a battlefield. It felt like mine again, scarred but standing. One evening I sat by the fire with my notebook. The last page remained blank until I wrote, "Justice served. Mara and Raphael exposed. Silas's memory preserved." I closed it gently and set it aside. Then I looked at Silas's photograph, the one of him with the catfish so big it nearly tipped him over. I could almost hear his laugh again, the unguarded joy of a boy who once believed the world was honest. "I kept my promise," I whispered. "I found the truth." The flames crackled, warm against the cold night. Outside, the snow fell steady, covering the scars of the earth, just as justice had covered the sins that tried to erase my son. For the first time since that dreadful call, I felt the faintest thread of peace.